Hi, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of Valley of Depth, a new podcast from Archaea Media. Archaea builds media brands around the critical technologies shaping national security. We do this through Payload, which covers the space industry, Ignition, which covers nuclear energy, and Tectonic, focused on defense tech, through journalism, events, and original research. With Valley of Depth, we're going deeper, talking to founders, investors, policymakers, and military leaders who are building and shaping some of the most complex and consequential technologies in the world. Today, we're excited to kick things off with Bryon Hargis, CEO of Castelion, a defense startup developing low-cost, mass-producible hypersonic missiles to provide the U.S. and its allies with a credible non-nuclear deterrent. Bryan and I discuss the founding story, the technology behind the product, the China threat, and much, much more. Bryan, take us back to late 2022. What inspired you and your co-founders to leave SpaceX and start a defense company?
Well, my background, like just what I've done my entire career, has always been aerospace and defense. And so even what I was doing at SpaceX was defense related. Like I was developing kind of the Starshield and Starlink applications for government in terms of like business development and owning that. And so when you look at kind of like what America's needs are to like actually achieve like national level deterrence to prevent, future warfare, one of the things that has been happening over a very long period of time is just kind of a seeding ground as far as like our technological capabilities, our manufacturing capabilities. Obviously, what SpaceX has done has just been an absolutely incredible on like the launch side and Starlink, Starshield, and like the applications of that to national security. But when you look at like from a national perspective, to have a deterrent effect on another nation, like the country needs like overall integrated capability, and it was quite obvious to me that long range strike in terms of providing like the kinetic part of the kill chain is not going super well. Like if you just read the news, but if you're more in tune with what's happening with hypersonics and like what the Chinese and what the Russians are doing, it's like even worse story. And so this was really about starting a business to get after that problem set, because at least in the 20 years that I have been in aerospace defense, actually it's longer than that. I'm older than I guess my mental model myself, but it's been talked about for forever. Like we've got to go faster, we got to innovate, we got to go, we have to build more, they need to cost less. And nobody's doing anything. Like there's no, like who's making those significant actions that's changing that? And Castelion is really focused on affordable long-range strike purely as a deterrence, because like if the country has that, we can actually avoid future conflicts. So that's obviously not in the mission set of getting to Mars, and was under no illusions of that. And so that's why we went out and started this business.
Well, let's unpack something you just mentioned, or I'll kind of expand on it, which is this credible non-nuclear deterrence. What does that mean in practice?
When you look at like just how foreign policy plays out, or even, let's just say personal interactions, like if you look at kind of like what the game theory of that is, the optimal strategy in these types of situations is actually tit for tat. There's actually a very good video, YouTube by Veritasium, talking about that and how that plays into kind of like policy. The issue has been, as we've, past couple decades, we've been seeding this ground, as I mentioned. And so where the US still has kind of deterrent effect is really like economic deterrence. Like we can create like economic sanctions to, basically punish a country for not doing what we want. And then of course we have strategic nuclear deterrence, which is like the ultimate deterrence, but it's not something that you're just going to like pull out and use lightly. And unfortunately, what's happened, especially against like peer adversaries such as China, is that we've lost everything in the middle. We've lost all credible deterrence. And so given that, you have very limited policy options for how would you respond if they're doing something that you disagree with, to kind of force them back to talking about like the problem and coming to like a mutual agreement. The country has lost that overall. And so we're building these long-range strike weapon systems. They also happen to be hypersonic, because that gives the country back those options to kind of force like a gradual escalation if somebody is doing something that you disagree with from a national policy perspective. And that is actually the optimal game theoretic strategy for how you cooperate and actually everybody prospers. if you're familiar with like Prisoner's Dilemma, um, that's the actual optimal strategy to the game. But it doesn't work if you have no ability to actually put force behind your words.
Right. Well, we're going to definitely talk about the threat from China in a lot more detail. But before we get into that, I actually do want to take a quick step back. The founders, all the founders of Castelion are former SpaceXers. And if there's something that I've seen time and time and again from SpaceX alumni, is this is how how you guys build companies, ruthless on timelines, deeply technical, vertically integrated. How has the SpaceX culture shaped Castelion's mission and culture?
For me personally, and I think everybody's story is a little bit different, but yes, there are some kind of common themes of what comes out of SpaceX. But for me personally, like you start in aerospace, like you come out of school and you go into aerospace, and like you're a beginning engineer, and you think you know how to do engineering, and you go into like a traditional environment, and everything that you think would like make sense from like a common sense perspective, you're basically is beaten out of you by more senior engineers. Like, that's not how we do aerospace. You do it like this. And you're like, oh, okay, I guess I just don't know anything. And my experience at SpaceX was like, oh man, if you just came out of school and you ignored all those folks and were given an environment where you can just go do things and, make those rapid iterative cycles, you can actually make progress in aerospace again. Because kind of the way it's talked about in like the traditional aerospace is like the low hanging fruit is gone, the easy stuff is done, and that's why everything is so complex and slow. And you don't know any better, like as a young engineer, except that it just feels unnatural. But you try to do things like the way that feels right, it gets beaten out of you. And so for me, like SpaceX really showed me, like, oh man, this is like the low hanging fruit is not all gone. You can still make Apollo era progress even in 2025, but you just can't do it operating under kind of the same construct and systems engineering approach that like the traditional guys do it. And demanding very high outcomes, pushing aggressive schedules, and then giving individual team members the authority and accountability to get stuff done. It's like, holy crap, working in that environment, you can just make tremendous outcomes still possible. And the low hanging fruit isn't done. Turns out you can just go do things. And for me, like SpaceX was like eye opening in that regard. Like, you can still do this. We don't have to read about what happened in the 60s. Like, you can still go build a company that does that.
How many people are at Castelion now?
Oh goodness. I think it's an ever increasing number. I think we are right around 80.
Yeah.
We have, of course, like offers that have accepted and haven't even come in yet, but we just moved into a new facility in Torrance actually to expand, because we were getting pretty tight with people sitting in like the walkways of our prior building.
How has it been hiring, like, for the mission? Like, I'm kind of curious to know, has it been difficult? Has it just been like, you endless stream of resumes? Like, how is talk to me a little bit about the cultural shift of folks wanting to work for a defense company.
We have a bit different hiring practice than I've seen from some others. Like, we're kind of slow to hire, quick to fire kind of approach. Like, we're very guarded about who we let in, because honestly, like as a small company, like where your main distinction of what you're doing is just like you're building a different culture and a different engineering culture and systems engineering process, like letting the wrong folks in could just completely derail that, especially if they're like the loudest voice in the room. So finding the right talent is, in my opinion, like one of the toughest things that we do. It's literally like the top focus of like the executive team day in, day out, is like recruiting and growing, but getting the right people. There has been like a tremendous shift in my mind of kind of common acceptance that, hey, working for a defense tech company is now cool again, which has obviously helped bring in like great applicants. Whereas hell, like 10 years ago is like, oh, like, why would you go work in defense? Like, you don't want to do anything cool. You don't want to, you're wanting a slow pace. And I think that that's no longer the mindset, even in aerospace in general. And I think SpaceX played a very large part in that, with basically making aerospace like a fun, cool thing to go do. And that's like, watching that Falcon Heavy launch, like my wife watched that with like her kindergarten class, and like all the kindergartners like jumping up and down and cheering for a rocket launch. Like, you didn't see that, much before that, except for like back in the Apollo era, and that's really cool.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. All right, let's talk about the fun stuff. Let's talk about missiles. I want to talk. I want to talk a little, just for the audience sake. Maybe let's just kind of start things off. How is a hypersonic missile different from a conventional missile? What capabilities does it bring to the military? Maybe break down some of the differences, how it flies, how it maneuvers, and why it matters on the modern battlefield.
So hypersonic is just like the quick and dirty is like it's greater than Mach 5. The actual technical definition is more involved, but you get compressible flow, et cetera, et cetera. But the real reason why that matters, because like no one care, like if you just could make something that definitely got to the target and always got to the target, like no one would care how it got there. It could teleport there. It flies very high and flies very fast and has like a lot of energy. And so when you just look at from like a survivability of the weapon perspective, in terms of like it's hard to shoot down. And obviously, there's a tremendous amount of investment by adversaries to be able to just negate all like currently known weapons. It makes that problem exceedingly difficult, which is why, by the way, like the Chinese and the Russians have developed their hypersonic systems, is they're just basically negating, God knows, like $1 trillion of U.S. spend on missile defense, just going around that. And so, really, like you're after like a few core tenets: survivability. The time to target, because you're going fast, is short. So therefore, the target is likely to still be where you thought it was when you fired the weapon, which is important. Like if your alternatives are like a cruise missile, where it might take like an hour or more to get there. And just the fact that you can, from a physics-based perspective, because you're flying over so much of the atmosphere, you're flying in thinner air, you can get longer ranges out of a similar size object. And so that's the traits. That's why hypersonics are important. It's not just because like it's going fast. It's all those other pieces to it.
And if you were to define sort of where the U.S. capability stands today versus the capability of our adversaries, particularly China, how would you define or think about that?
Oh, in hypersonics, we're getting our ass kicked. It's in a lot of ways, almost in a lot of areas, the U.S. has been ceding ground to China, but in hypersonics, like we've been passed. And I say that not in the sense that like, does the U.S. probably have technical know-how that the Chinese do not have currently? Yes, but we're not deploying 10 different hypersonic systems at the scale of thousands. And that's actually what it matters when it comes time to like, does this capability actually matter? That actually matters, and the U.S. is extremely far behind. Even despite the fact that we've been working on these types of systems for decades longer than anybody else, we haven't really transitioned it very well. And that's a huge problem, because now your adversary has all those traits that I just mentioned, and they're basically just using it to push us further and further away, so that like basically in a regional conflict, they can do whatever they want and we can't get in to do anything about it. And like when I was speaking about that, how we've lost that kind of mid-range deterrence, it's exactly that. Like we've lost our tools to actually engage without suffering like tremendous losses. And that's not a good place for the country.
Well, so one thing you're alluding to a bit, which is this kind of trade-off versus an exquisite system, which is what it largely has defined the U.S. military-industrial base up until recent times. But maybe talk a little bit about that trade-off. Like I know you've used the term sufficiently capable as a definition for the Castelion capability, but talk a little bit about that trade-off versus an exquisite system.
The U.S. is very good at building very exquisite systems, like the most exquisite, at tremendous cost. But when you look at like if your intended goal is to deter another country from action, like having a handful of very exquisite systems is not, that cost literally more than some of the targets that they're targeting, is not the way to gain deterrence. And so it actually, in my opinion, doesn't matter. Like yes, it is useful against very certain things, but it doesn't change the tide of a war, or change the calculus of whether somebody's going to be deterred from that conflict or not. You don't get bonus points for extra killing a target. Like it's either disabled or not. And sufficiently capable is like taking an actual concerted effort and focus to not overbuild the system from what it actually needs to do, and just getting after like the real challenge here is, how do we build enough that they care and they think about what they're about to do before they go do it? And to make that cheap enough that the customer, the government, could actually afford that many, because like that's the capability that the country needs. And so that's a very different way of thinking than I'd say traditional aerospace thinking, where you're just jamming in capability no matter the cost. But we're not in the situation where we're sufficiently far ahead anymore that we can actually afford to behave that way. And it just requires like a very different end target that has to permeate the culture of the company, frankly, because you don't get that just by saying it once on paper and then like telling people to go do it. Like you have to enforce it every day. Like every design review is like, well, what did that change cause, or cost us in terms of like cost and schedule of the system, or manufacturability. Like you have to actually ask those questions and reinforce it with everybody. It's a very different way of thinking about the problem. It's probably a much more commercial way of thinking about the problem, because like of course these are the questions that anybody operating in a commercial space would ask themselves about whatever their product is. But it's very foreign thinking for defense.
So I do finally want to ask about your background. You have a very impressive piece of machinery right behind you. So what are we looking at? Tell us a little bit about what it is you're building and like sort of the current status of the system.
Yeah, so behind me is a government surplus Marine MKR-18 LVSR, like logistics vehicle. So I believe the story on this one is that a Marine with 55 miles on the odometer wrecked this. And for some reason, the government completely fixed it. It looks totally fine, and then surplused it. But this vehicle can literally back up to a 20-foot shipping container or a flat rack, and literally it has a hook on it, a hydraulic hook, and it can just pick up literally like 50,000 pounds off the ground and put it on the back and roll away. So what we've done is actually created like a launcher in that configuration for the back. The truck is just stock. And obviously this has like military applications where this might be a way or a vehicle they would like to fire missiles from in the future. So it does help us from that perspective. But quite frankly, when you go out to do a test, it's super helpful to have just be able to roll on, roll off, not require like a launcher from anybody else. It's just like, I just need a patch of dirt. Because you'll discover when you're trying to go out and do testing, anything that you ask for from a range just causes more delays. And so having this capability literally just lets us roll up, do a test, and then immediately leave. Because of course they tend to want you off the range as fast as possible as well. And so that's what we built for ourselves. And I think the team has affectionately named this one Gertrude, which is, I don't fully agree with like the 1800s naming, but what have you. You don't make all the decisions, even if you're CEO. So there you go.
So you guys have been, no, you're talking about testing. You guys have been testing very quickly and fast. Like, tell me a little bit about some of the recent tests you've had.
Yes, we've been flying almost, I think, consistently. There's a little longer period over the holidays, but we've done a flight every 2 to 3 weeks since mid-November. And so if you just imagine kind of like that, what we're talking about early, like the core thing is really how fast, what is your pace of learning? Nothing else matters. If you are the dumbest person on a subject, but you learn faster than everybody else, that like mathematically given some period of time, you are now the smartest person on that subject if you keep your pace of learning up. And so like kind of a core tenet is really just maintaining that pace of learning and making that as high as possible and setting every other business process up in the company of learning fast. And so the culmination of like, what does that mean to learn from an engineering perspective is you design something, you build something, you make assumptions, you model it, but then you go test it and see like, are all those assumptions and are all the choices I made actually correct? And did they really work out the way that we thought they would? It's obviously like, we're not trying to do something wrong, but you just don't know. And I think that's where traditional aerospace has just absolutely lost touch with reality. Is there's kind of this general premise that, hey, if I just spend a really long time and just model the crap out of a problem, I can just design the perfect thing out of the gate. And those days are over. They were never, I don't even think they ever existed. They didn't even exist back in the 60s. Like physics, even with a simple set of rules, becomes so complex so fast. Like your model is always just an approximation. And so technically you're making an educated guess. And then it's like the testing really confirms like, was that guess right or wrong? But even on like the manufacturability side, like, you design something, you're thinking like, this will be easy to manufacture. And then you go do it the first time and you're like, I don't know what we were thinking. This is an absolute disaster. Let's change it. It's really just those reps allow you to actually make a very good product. And that's very antithetical to kind of traditional aerospace thinking. It's quite common in other fields, like where you're going to iterate, like obviously like software has a name for this, agile. Um, you do the same thing for hardware, and turns out your results can be excellent. But it's kind of funnily like it's traditional aerospace still, despite all the proof points that are now out there, I'm like, this does seem to work. It's still honestly like it's not a commonly accepted. It's kind of frowned upon, and even with customers, it takes time to actually win them over to this way of thinking because it's very different than what they are used to. But in my opinion, it's 100% the correct way to go.
Well, let's talk about sort of a byproduct of all this, which is like the management of risk. And there are other companies out there, there's lots of well-funded companies out there who are building and building kinetic systems. And in certain cases, and I'm not going to name a name, but there have been high-profile incidences of this move fast culture ending up, not looking great for the company, right? In the way that they've managed risk. So tell me a little bit about how you iterate quickly without compromising safety and reliability.
Yeah, I think you have to divorce the concept of risk of whether you're talking risk to safety and risk to like, did I just destroy that equipment or did the test fail? Quite frankly, the risk to safety is obviously paramount. You have to care about that at all times and with what you're doing and being very, very cautious. The risk to like a failed test or the risk to your hardware, if you're designing in this kind of approach where your hardware is plentiful and the cost of it is not that high, is generally people are too risk averse and they should be more risk on. And so we view those as kind of two separate categories where I'm 100% okay with taking risk on the hardware. I'm not okay with taking risk with people or the potential to get hurt. Well, you can divorce those, in my opinion, quite easily. But it is again, this is a thing that you just have to practice what you preach. And like in engineering meetings, you have to actively talk about both of these things. For example, just kind of give uh, a practical example of this. Like every engineer at Castelion knows what our costs are per day for the company to just survive. If you are trading an engineering decision that may cost the company X dollars, but might hold like us up by 2 weeks from like learning something that's critical, if they just know the number of like, well, like that's going to cost us, X hundreds of thousands of dollars of delay, or you just spend like 10 grand and just go learn it now, that's a like easy choice. Like just do it. Like we can fail that test a lot. And honestly, like don't even ask me about it unless this is like a financial decision that may be like company ending. Like clearly we need to have further discussion on that. That's a different level of risk. But you know, we're operating in a regime right now where we're doing this testing so often and we have purposely made the hardware so plentiful and cheap that we can just continue to have tests and we can take even greater risk with greater payoff. Because quite honestly, those things are correlated. And it's a fantastic place to be to actually be able to afford the technical risk to try something that if it works, it's like, wow, this is amazing. It unlocks something huge. High chance it doesn't work, but that's okay because you're testing often enough that this isn't impactful to your overall goals and you are learning. Because again, I think a major distinction of like this approach versus kind of a more traditional approach is like all engineers are now actively like getting to see the results of their work in very quick succession. You learn tremendously from that versus like drawing it out over like 5-6 years where they may move on to another project before ever like seeing like did their design actually work before they copy it to the next thing. There's just like a tremendous advantage to this.
Yeah. Uh, who are you selling to within the DoD? Can
Oh,
you talk a little bit about that?
so we have several contracts. I'm not going into too specific, but obviously, like all major services buy missiles. Like it's, I think this is actually one of the areas, like perhaps in like the rush to like say like defense tech is hot. There's a pretty big distinction between companies that are building things that the the military already buys and already has the ConOps to employ, without any change of doctrine or training, versus like this upends everything. And not only do they have to buy something new, but they have to have a different training. All the service branches buy missiles, and so really what we were looking at is, kind of across the board, and we'll be announcing like what we're working on in the near future. We just looked at like, if our goal is like what's going on like in the Western Pacific and Europe, and how would we deter future conflict, what would be the most useful weapons to go build and to work on. We've been very targeted at what we believe that answer is, and we are trying to leverage that across all of the services, because I don't have a business model where I just want to continue to get paid to make a slightly different variation of a missile and get like a new program from a different service. I want to productize what we're doing. Like the government doesn't really think about it this way, but the thing that's actually a limited resource for us is like the engineering effort that goes into making a good missile and the manufacturing systems that go into making a good production facility for missiles. I want to leverage and reuse that as much as possible and make that the product, and then just make the missiles capable enough to be used by like very different kind of in use cases and launch from very different things. But that's, in my opinion, how like we win as a country, and like we will also win like from a sales perspective, in my opinion, just by offering that. Because quite frankly, there's real frustrations within the government of like what kind of results they're getting from like the traditional process, and a real desire, as you can obviously see like with like the news and the current administration, of like changing things up and trying to get better. And I think that the way that we are approaching this is going to be good for the country, and going to lead to some kind of different ways of operating that have been kind of normalized over the years.
And how are you navigating the acquisition system? I know you've had I know you have experience. You're a bit of a slightly different case because at SpaceX you had experience doing this, but maybe just to like having that experience, how are you navigating the acquisition system? And for any startup founders who are listening to this, like what kind of advice would you give there?
Yeah. It's like it's been a 25-year education through fire. Like, I mean, honestly, I feel like so bad when it's like, someone like fresh out's like, I'm gonna go sell to the government. I'm like, oh my God, you're gonna get eaten alive and spit out. Like it's such a brutal, tough customer with such complexity, and then like layering on legal abstracts that like sometimes don't even make sense, but you just need to know. The At the end of the day, if you have to involve, like, you can't just go build like a product, even no matter how good it is, and like not involve the government. Like they won't trust it. You really need to just go through and do the effort of making sure that you have good product fit. And there's multiple groups within the government that you have to get to agree that what you are doing is what the country wants. Like you've got the folks that hold the money, you've got the folks that hold like writing the requirement, because like the government doesn't just go off and randomly buy stuff, they buy to a requirement. You have the program offices that dole out our DT&E funds, like the national labs, for example. And then you have the PEOs that are doing like the acquisition dollars that will come later. You really have to engage with all of them, but the most important thing is to find a champion in one of them. It can honestly come from anywhere, but it is, I think what people don't understand, they just think like, hey, if I'm really good at writing a proposal and I'm like really good at responding to this thing, or I have the best product, like someone will just come buy it. And the system is so stacked against that. That's not true. You have to find a champion within government who is basically going to go to bat for you to try to make whatever you are doing happen, and then just elbow out, like connect you to other offices that are going to be important at some part of this, and literally helping you get through all the wickets. And so a typical like journey is always like this like crawl, walk, run, where you're going to do like a study, then you're going to do a prototype, and then you're going to do an actual program of record as like the third stage. The first stage is typically for a small business is going to be SBIRs, because like quite honestly, it's the easiest way that they can give you money, and the fastest. And so everybody's going to have SBIRs. But while you're working that SBIR, you absolutely have to be taking like all of the BD steps to get in with the next group that's going to do the prototyping contract. Because if you wait till you're done, you might be waiting another year and a half, and that's like typically like like the valley of death is when you go from RDT&E to program of record. But if you didn't work that in advance, you're talking like 2-year minimum delay, and like you're probably not going to survive as a business to get across the divide. So you have to be just doing that and building that momentum. And the way you do that is you really find like that internal champion who's going to help you find more champions. Because I have a like a rule, like just a guideline that I tell everybody on our team. It's really like the 80-15-5 rule. Like 80% of the folks that you meet in like a meeting with the government are going to be indifferent. They're going to be like, that was cool, and they're going to go about their day. 15% are literally going to be mad at you just for existing for some reason. Like you didn't even do anything to them, but like they're going to take it upon themselves to like literally like club you over the head technically and insult you in the meeting. And then that last 5% is going to be that champion. And like your job is to find that 5% because that's the only group early on that's going to be helpful to a new company. If you're a prime, you basically have almost like all 100% on board with whatever you're doing, even if like your track record is horrific. Like there's actually this unfairness in a startup where you are expected to not only be more capable than the primes, deliver better, not have any type of behaviors like they've demonstrated. It's just like the standard is actually even higher. And of course, like you're a new business trying to like do everything from scratch. It's a brutally stacked game, and finding that champion and finding the right people to put on in your company that actually can navigate all of the complexities of this is like critical. I mean, that's why this is not normally done. This is literally very hard.
So I'm going to address the champion point in just a second, but I did want to thank you for using the term Valley of Death, because we did just rename this podcast, and it's now called Valley of Depth, because we talk about the challenges and we talk about how hard they are and how deep they are. So I appreciate that. I didn't even have to ask the question. And by the way, Bryan, you're the first episode. I didn't even get to tell you that. So.
Oh, fantastic. I'm glad to start this with such a positive note.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I want to talk about the point on champion and that 5%. Like, so is it really just a numbers game at the end of the day? Like, how do you know? Like, I've spoken to investors in the past, and they've said the same thing. Like, look, if I talk to what do you look for in an investment, especially within the defense tech ecosystem? And everyone says, look, obviously the founder, obviously the idea, all that, all the usual stuff. But I ask them, who is their champion in within the DoD, and which office do they sit in? And if they don't have a good answer to that, then that's a bad sign to me. So like from your perspective, like on a more practical level, like how does that look like? Is it just a numbers game? You're just gonna have to meet a lot of people and eventually find that person that is your supporter.
I think like the thing I always look for in somebody that does sales is honestly, it's like obviously you have to have a personality that does not turn other people off, because people have to like this person. But after that, like I need them to show that they have the aptitude to learn technical things, because the government is honestly one of the most technical buyers in the world. Like they will have experts that have backgrounds and they have an expert for every specific niche thing, and you've got to convince them that you're not an idiot, and your salesperson is like that front line. But after that, it's persistence. If you are easily discouraged by no, you're not going to be able to do government sales, because it is mostly no. And you have to just keep going out there and keep talking to folks and keep meeting people. Now, there's a level here of like, this isn't just like, go do whatever you want and never take no for an answer, because like that'll quickly turn into everybody just turning against you. Like you actually have to accept like market feedback and like discriminate from like, that was just somebody in the 15% camp, and I don't know what I did to them just by existing, and they hate me. And hey, everybody's telling me like like my product's not useful to them, I need to do blank. Like you have to be able to discriminate that, but you just have to get out there and talk to these groups. And like as an early stage startup, you're going to struggle just to get into the room and to get a meeting, because they're going to not even want to have the time to take a meeting, because they get bombarded by meetings all day. That's where having somebody that obviously has like a little bit of past history, that has worked and done something with a relevant group, can be very helpful, because you can now get a meeting just because they know that person and they're willing to give, at least 30 minutes of an hour of time to talk about it out. but that your sales org has to just be persistent and just be out there constantly. Because like in government sales, it's not just sales. They're your main interface to like product development. Like they are literally like the front line of being able to come back and tell you like where your product is like wrong and not going to work and why. And they have to be able to do that product function as well. And to think otherwise is a mistake, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Now, I want to switch gears and talk about everyone's favorite topic. I'm going to lean into the mic for this one, the Golden Dome.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
so let's talk about the Golden Dome. Okay, so first let's do some definitions. Like, what the hell is the Golden Dome?
Yeah. Okay. So for folks that haven't been following this, obviously, like it started with Iron Dome for America, which has been aptly renamed Golden Dome. So that's like the Israeli missile defense system, which obviously was put to the test significantly earlier. Um, the intention is to rebuild that same capability for the US. Obviously, a little bit more challenging situation in that the US is much larger with a much larger geographic area to cover. But the intention is basically to defend the US and allies from any type of uh, airborne threat, spaceborne threat. Um, I don't know if they're worried like somehow like ships and submarines are somehow going to be in Golden Dome. I don't know. I haven't heard that one, but like certainly space and anything in the air is a defensive target. Um, and I think that the capability to do that is obviously like what the US has been working on with like ballistic missile defense for decades. Um, but that's a fairly like I would say like fragile system in the sense like it's not going to work against huge numbers, and it's very specifically built against ballistic missiles, and there's like all these various flavors. Like there's THAAD for terminal air defense, but I think like the vision here from the Trump administration is really like if we were to like have to defend the country against thousands of missiles being launched by an adversary, how do we do that? And the current systems that we have are not going to support that.
Well, so then let's talk a little bit about, and I know there's a lot of questions about budget and what this looks like, and everyone has their different perspectives. So I certainly don't want to put you on the spot and tell you, exactly what's going to happen. But what is your kind of perspective? Like, what do we need to practically build this? There's talk about layered models like kinetic interceptors, space-based sensors, electronic warfare. Like, I mean, there's so many different ground-based interceptors, space-based interceptors. Like,
Yeah.
what do you think? What do you think this architecture looks like? What do we need to practically build this?
Oh, I mean, so the correct answer is that you need all of it, because I mean, like warfare is a cat and mouse game, right? Like if you just go do one thing, everybody else just focuses on the thing that defeats that thing and then goes and does that. Like, so you have to have like defense in depth and the capability to counter lots of things. You also, you're always worried about some vulnerability in your defensive system, and so you want to have multiple defensive systems in case like that thing doesn't work in some way that you didn't expect when the time comes against a specific whatever. Um, so you look at the core pieces of like, well, what do you need to execute this mission? That's where the hard choices that MDA and everybody else involved are going to have to make to figure out, here are like the most impactful capabilities. Here's what we can, like the best way to acquire that capability for the cost, and then fund those things. And the way this is typically done, and the way it probably is being done currently, just like having been on the other side in prior roles, they're typically like these very detailed physics-based models of like the performance of like the red system, performance of the blue system, and they play out these giant like modeling scenarios, and then they literally put a score on each of the capabilities, and that helps define the architecture. So it's like physics-based, it's like data-driven, like here's what we think. Of course, as you know, with any model, it's only as good as the assumptions, and sometimes your assumptions are wrong. But that's typically how they would make their investments.
And do you think that startups are going to be driving most of this execution around Golden Dome, or do you think it'll be legacy primes?
From a dollar standpoint, I would be dumbfounded if they're driving it from like the majority of dollars standpoint. Like we get, folks get excited, like, oh, it's like a new wave of like startups and defense tech, and it's like, yeah, we're winning like 1% of the budget or less currently. Like, um, I do think though, from like the innovation perspective and like what actually um, new thinking of ways to achieve this capability at a affordable cost, I do think that'll be much higher weight to the new guys. Maybe there's going to be some potential like interesting partnerships between old money, new money, which would be interesting to see. But I do think like the innovation will probably come from the newer folks because, quite honestly, the big guys approach, and even like I've already seen some of this in the news, is like, well, just give us like $50 billion and like we've got it. It's like I don't know that that's going to be like what the country can afford to do, and so they're going to be forced to make some choices of going with a more risky but less costly solution and giving it a shot, which is honestly what I think they should do. Like it should be a balance between the two.
And well, so I want to go back to Castelion. When do you think you'll be delivering missiles at scale, and what steps need to happen between now and then?
Oh, there's like an infinite mountain of work, but by 2027. So hopefully it's a an infinite series that converges. But the the real work that has to happen, like there is of course like the technical aspects of like building a hypersonic weapon system that just functions and does what it's supposed to do. Building out like the manufacturing systems for that weapon is an even bigger challenge, and that is like the kind of like the middle hardness. The true hardness though when dealing with like the DoD and like delivering a new weapon system is like actually getting through certification. um there are so many gateways to getting on platforms in terms of like all of the testing, et cetera, that quite honestly, the way that the country has been approaching that for a long time now aren't congruent with fast timelines. I'll say that to just be kind. They're going to have to be thought through of like how do we maintain like safety of like the weapon system, but like if China's developing new weapons in like a 5-year span, you can't take 5 years just to certify a weapon. There'll always be ahead. Like so that can't be the answer. So we have to do better. How does that happen? Like that's in my mind going to be one of the toughest challenges, and like that's a step that we have to get through to actually delivering to the warfighter. And um, we spend a lot of time thinking through how to do that and even working on it currently because I don't think there is an easy answer other than like partnering with the government to being like we are all aligned with this is the goal that we all want. Like how do we get this done together in a way that everybody's happy and that what we are building is safe?
I we didn't talk about this when I talked about who you were selling into, but how are you thinking about Europe? There's been this revitalization of the European defense ecosystem because of sort of some of the geopolitical chess pieces that are being moved around right now. How are you thinking about Europe as a customer?
I'm hopeful that they will want to still do business with an American company, but I do actually think like them as a collective, like taking more ownership of like defense investment and just defense spending and building new systems is a good thing. But I mean, I really view I want to sell to our allies. Like we're like just to be clear, like Castelion doesn't get to decide who we sell missiles to. Like the State Department and the DoD get to decide that. But our intention is that we would make these available to our foreign allies because, like at the end of the day, like what I'm trying to work on preserving it for everyone, including my family, is world peace and Western values, and Europe is a massive part of that. And so I certainly think I hope that they would be interested in buying missiles from an American company, which I think they will. But obviously, like there's some tension at the moment, but
Sure.
I think we'll get through that.
I want to talk a little bit about competition. So, do you see yourself competing head on with a Lockheed or Raytheon on hypersonics, or do you see yourself filling a different niche?
Yes, in the sense that there's really only two main missile manufacturers in the United States, Raytheon and Lockheed. It's like a duopoly. So in the sense of like, are we intending to sell weapons and complete missiles? Yes. But in the same way that they all compete, in the sense that like I'm also happy to partner with those guys. Like I don't. There are obvious things that we cannot do as a company that we would be a very good partner to one of those large primes. But on the other hand, like we're also going for like this, good enough category of missile that is not really, in my opinion, a focus of those guys. And so really I see us building out a different market category for affordable long range hypersonic strike that's not being met by anybody. And so we're not trying to like encroach on like the exquisite hypersonic weapon space. I'm trying to figure out how can we manufacture tens of thousands of missiles per year at extraordinarily low cost, and field them as needed. And so that is, I think, a little bit of a different problem. I don't know 100% how they will view that yet, but we do talk to them, about possible opportunities.
I want to talk for a second about financing. So you've raised a little over $100 million. I don't want to, I don't want to have you give away any special sauce, but like, what is the scale of capital that's going to be needed for you to like pull off your vision for the company? Like, tell me, are we talking billions of dollars? Are we talking
Oh,
sub a billion? Like, give us a little sense of like, what does that look like?
yeah. I mean, we do not need billions of dollars to get to kind of like our first, you know, marker of like a program or record. But this is a very capital, like hardware in general is very capital intensive upfront. Um, Certainly with some of the things that we're doing, like just like facility space, like I can't just like build like in a normal warehouse with energetics and pay normal rents. Like I need to surround that building by, 1,000 empty acres. um, so we have done a very, very good job at splitting like a mix between equity investment, debt, and customer contracts to fund our growth. And so I do think long term, yes, we will probably end up ultimately raising billions. But those will be to like fund future growth and future manufacturing capabilities, but they're also going to be offset by customer contracts and use of debt, because quite frankly, like we're a very good case for the appropriate use of debt. I'll say responsible use of debt, not irresponsible, not paying people's salaries.
Right, right, right. So I want to ask a couple more questions, but just get into more the head and of who Bryon Hargis is. So just bear with me for a second. I do want to talk a little bit about culture and legacy. Like, what kind of company do you want to build here? Is this like the next great prime contractor? Are you thinking something leaner, more mission focused? Like, how are you thinking about the business long term from a culture and legacy perspective?
I want to build the company where if the US has a challenge and needs a defense solution, they can count on us to come to us and manufacture that solution. Like I guess I would distinguish us, like I don't want to be an integrator. I want to be a manufacturer, defense manufacturer solving national problems, and whatever the country needs, that is what we will devote the company to, because that's honestly like what I care about and what everybody here cares about is like what has impact for the country. Like we're all Americans, and quite frankly, it's honestly been a bit terrifying to just kind of watch how we're ceding territory over the past decades, to others. And I'm very firmly of opinion that like I think the normal human bias is just to assume like the future is going to be like the past and just wait it like that. And I don't believe that's true. History, like you read anything in history, like that's not true. You have to be very proactive about taking care of it. And my intention is for Castelion to be a company that the country can depend on to manufacture whatever it needs to keep America safe.
So I think you've sort of answered my last question also, because I was going to ask if you achieve your mission, how does the world look different?
Oh, I mean, I want I want safety for all. Like if everybody just like stop stop fighting everybody. That'd be great for me. Like I know people are like, oh, maybe you run a missile company. Like you just must want to like hurt people. I'm like, no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Um, I want safety and security. Like a lot of like the US's like tremendous success, both from like economic, cultural success from World War II is like been predicated on our kind of military supremacy and this like concept of like American exceptionalism. Like I want that for the next 50 years. I want that for the next 100 years. And I don't think if we're not very careful, like that we can't take that for granted. Um, I think I think that is completely achievable though. And honestly, that's what I want for my family, and that's what I want for everybody else. I think everybody has kind of like a different like personal like reason for existing, but it's uh, safety and security and like reducing like some of the federal deficit in the U.S. Like, let's go spend more money on education, and not like get more results from defense and other things, and go spend more money on like educating like our next generation. Huge. That would be a huge win in my book.
No, very well said. What should we be looking out for in terms of milestones? Like your next milestone that you're happy to talk about publicly.
We will continue to release video. I mean, like we do all this testing, even like a subsystem level, but like, no one really cares about watching like an avionics board slowly morph to something different. but we do
Hey,
these.
those people are out there.
Oh, somebody would find that very fascinating. I mean, there was like these great YouTube videos of like people tearing down early Starlink terminals in the early days. And I honestly like love watching them because like you could just see how happy they were to like try to figure out how it worked. We will have constant flight tests, which we'll be posting the videos of. The flight tests are going to like increase in complexity and I'd say capability pretty rapidly over the next 6 months. And we'll be formally announcing kind of like what we are working on as product one. And potentially in conjunction like with demonstrations with the government that it's not our choice if they're public or not, but like I think they probably will be. There's going to be a lot of cool things to share over like the next 6 months to a year. Obviously, with this being national security, like there's certain handcuffs on it as well of what we can and can't share, but it'll be an exciting next year for sure.
Right. Of course. And then one thing I failed to ask you, Bryan, in the beginning is Castelion. What does that mean? Where did that name come from?
Okay, so great story. I think everybody who starts a business learns this. Like you just get sued immediately for trademark infringement if your name is just not gobbledygook. So
yeah,
our first company name, we were like promptly sued. So like, okay, let's go to like, Chat GPT and just ask it for like suggestions of like, please make up things that like we can actually buy the domain name. That like when you type it into Google, I want it to come back with like, I didn't find anything. Castelion was part of that process. We thought people could pronounce it correctly. I turned out it was like completely wrong on that front. Castelion is my favorite so far. I didn't see that coming. And then just to like really just hit this home, we were then promptly sued again over the name.
Oh no.
So, yes.
Wait, what is it? What other company like what kind of brand or company has that?
Nobody, but Castelion sued us for trademark infringement. As the second round. All this is public, so you can go look it up. But yeah, we have. I've never been sued in my life. I've now been sued multiple times over trademark infringement for naming things. So like honestly, like naming our missile, I'm like maybe the government wants to name it. Like they can name it, and then somebody can sue them.
Well, I'm not going to get into the whole thing, but we have a very similar story in terms of how we named our parent brand, because our original, we had some cool names we were thinking about. We were like, well, we're this defense media company. We should be like Prometheus or something like that. And then immediately every name we came up with, our lawyers were like, nope, can't use that. Nope, you can't use that. You'll get sued if you use that. You'll get sued if you use that. So then we ended up with this, Archaea, which is just very obscure, like microbiological term about these microorganisms that lived, actually still exist today, but have been on Earth since the beginning of life. and can and are known to survive in the most hostile environments on Earth. So it ended up working out really well, but it was a process to get to here. So
Yeah.
I feel for you. But great name though. You ended up with a great name. So
I appreciate that. Yeah, like hopefully we get to keep it.
so tell me about the ways that how else do you pronounce Castelion if not Castelion?
Well, I will say this: like even some of our employees get it wrong, like where it's Castilian, with like kind of like a I, and then but my like personal favorite that I just never foresaw happening was Cast Lion, and I'm like, oh, so that one's a bit awkward.
Yeah.
It, we actually tried to see how would you mispronounce the name before we like settled on it, and in most instances we did not come up with the way people are now saying it. So it's kind of honestly funny.
Well, it's a great name. I hope you get to keep it. And if you do end up having to
Thank you.
change it, we'll get you back on the show, and we'll get an update from you. So
I'll
but no,
crowdsource
Bryan,
the name so that we can't be sued for it.
exactly. But no, Bryan, really appreciate you being on the show. It was really great to have you, and excited to hear about your journey and all the amazing things that you guys are gonna do, especially for this country. So
I really appreciate that. Mo, thanks for having us. Awesome. What an honor to be the first guest, and really appreciate you having us on today.
It was an honor to have you. Until next time.
Absolutely. Take care.